Sorry to interrupt, but this call is now being recorded.
Welcome to the Task Force conference call on state-minority relations and trends in Arab political leadership in Israel with your host, Michal Steinman. Michal, go ahead, please.
Hi, shalom everyone. Happy New Year. Thank you for joining us for our first call for 2017. This call, as the invitation indicated, will try to provide an insight into trends that are happening today within the Arab community, or more precisely Arab leadership, in regards to state-minority relations, while also looking at the broader context, and that is the trends that are taking place in the Jewish majority, or more precisely Israeli government, in regards to this issue. The Institute for National Security Studies, or the INSS, has been researching and writing about these trends in Jewish-Arab relations for a while now, under the leadership of Meir Elran, who heads the INSS program on Homeland Security and the program on Socio-Military Relations. And we are very grateful that he could join us today. Once Meir will finish his presentation, we'll open for Q&A, and people can send them to me via email during the call, or present them themselves over the phone. The operator will remind everyone how to submit a question once Meir is finished. So Meir, thank you for joining us today, and please welcome, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Michal, for the kind introduction, and hello, everybody. I hope that you have enjoyed your vacation, a long one it was, and I hope that the weather was accommodating. It's not too bad here in Israel, as a matter of fact. Okay, so I shall start now with a sort of general briefing about our understanding of the situation within the Arab sector in Israel. And I'd like to start with the main message that I want to convey to you at this present time. My message is that we have found again and again, and there are quite a few very important indications, that the Arab public in Israel at large, this does not mean that it includes each and everybody among the 1.7 million Arabs in Israel, but the public, the overall Arab public in Israel, supports again and again the notion of integration, the notion of working together, and the notion of self-prosperity and upward mobility. And it means necessarily that this presents a clear attitude of moderation and pragmatism to the central relations, to the central issues of the relations with the Jewish majority. And I'll say a few words to show to you how our findings go hand in hand and actually collaborate this general message. At the same time, we see that the politicians among the Arab sector mostly represent somewhat a less moderate and pragmatic policy on the similar issues, even though they are still, or they can be characterized also by their pragmatism. But if you compare the overall satisfaction of the Arab public with regard to their political leadership on those central issues that are of interest to them, you can see that there is a gap, I would even dare to say a growing gap, between the public at large and their political leadership. So I would suggest on this one that the Joint List, as the major representation of the political representation of the Arabs in Israel in the Israeli Knesset, is somewhat more in tune than the general public to the nationalist Palestinian-related issues. Now, the third part of this statement, of this message, is that within the Joint Party, the Joint List, there is quite a variety of conflicting opinions and manifestations of these opinions. And, for example, we see that Balad, which is the more nationalist political party within the Joint List, stands as the most extreme group within the Joint List, representing the national Palestinian goals. And as the fourth layer, that within Balad we see that there is also a sort of a difference in nuances, in a way that shows that some of the leading politicians of Balad, namely Basel Ghattas and Hanin Zouabi, take an even more staunch, extreme nationalistic position, sometimes also expressing it in deeds that clash with the Israeli law. So this is my main message. To conclude, the overall public, the Arab public, is much more moderate and pragmatic as their leaders. The Joint List is more pragmatic than some of its parts. Balad stands up as a more extreme group, and within Balad we see some politicians that take an even more extreme stand and actions. So here, based on this message, or to reaffirm this message, I want to share with you some of the latest data that we have collected, either by ourselves or with the aid of other agencies, so as to show you that what I just said can be substantiated. So let's start with the data. Just a very recent survey that was conducted by a very interesting group of surveyors under the name of StatsNet, headed by a very interesting person by the name of Yusuf Maklade, who is a Druze by himself, by the way, but well familiar with the situation in the Arab sector. His latest poll, which was done exactly a week ago, suggested that with regard to questions that were asked about the actions, the unlawful actions of Basel Ghattas, that 80%, I repeat, 80% of the surveyed Arabs that were asked to express their opinion about his actions said that they are against it. 83% are against the actions referred to Basel Ghattas. Okay? Furthermore, about the same number, 84% think that what he allegedly did, I say allegedly because it was not as confirmed as yet in court, but apparently there are good indications that that's what he did, and I'm referring to the smuggling of cell phones into the security prisons in Israel. So 84% of the Arabs think that what he allegedly did was against the interests of the Arab public itself. So it was just not true that they are themselves that are against it, as suggested earlier, but many of them, or more of them, as a matter of fact, 84% think that what he did or allegedly did was against the interests of the Arab public. Now, interestingly enough, only 40% of the surveyed Arabs are in favor of what he did, which gives you a very clear picture of the overall attitude of the Arabs with regard to a very specific episode that happened just recently. Interestingly enough, in the same survey, he also asked, there were asked questions as to the standing and support of the Arab public to the different Arab politicians, and it was found that Basel Ghattas and Hanin Zouabi are believed by the people, by the Arab people, to be the worst members of Knesset that serve presently in the Israeli parliament. They got the highest percentage of negative perception or support 14% for Ghattas, and 10% respectively for Zouabi. So this is one interesting indication, both with regard to the overall moderation of the and pragmatism of the Arab sector, and what they think specifically of what Ghattas has allegedly done, and how they perceive it. Okay, so as I said before, and I now return to the second data component. I would like to state here that there is a wide gap of trust between the Arab constituency and the political leadership. It has been found again by the same survey made by Statnet that 71% of the Arab population do not believe in the Joint List, believe in the sense that they don't trust the Joint List and don't think that they represent them appropriately. Only 29% do believe in them as their representatives and as representatives of the public interest. So again, you see the quite significant gap in the overall perception of the Arab sector with regard to the role or standing of the Joint List in general. Another interesting figure that goes along the same line is that Ahmed Tibi, who is a part of the Joint List but does not belong, or he's not the official leader. The official leader of the Joint List, of course, is Ayman Odeh, but Ahmed Tibi enjoys the most support of the Arab constituency. About in different questions they were asked between 42 to 64%. Ayman Odeh, who is second, enjoys only 9 to 15% support of his constituency. And again, consistent to what I said before, the least support gets Hanin Zouabi, who has between 2 to 3% support. So again, a good indication that Ahmed Tibi, who has the image, let's say, of being very integrated in Israeli society, his Hebrew is excellent, his standing, I mean, he associates himself publicly all the time with Jewish communities, etc., etc. He gets a hugely, larger number of supporters. I mean, let's say about 400% more than the second one, who is Ayman Odeh. Very interesting, especially since, in many other respects, we see also Ayman Odeh as quite a pragmatic and moderate personality, and his politics are definitely pragmatic, and he's very collaborative to a large extent with what the government is trying to do versus the Arab sector. But as far as the Arab constituency is concerned, Ayman Odeh trades behind Ahmed Tibi to a very meaningful extent. Okay, now I want to move to another issue which was examined by a very recent poll that we did in INSS. This is the second year in a row that we do a survey which covers a wider variety of issues, in which we ask both Jews and Arabs to answer questions about different issues. But as far as our conversation today, I would like to share with you some of the more interesting findings that we have about the perception of the Arabs as to their own identity. So the question was, how do you, as an Arab, identify yourself? How do you define your own identity? Okay, so we gave them 7 or 8 different categories to relate to, and it was interesting that if you combine all the answers together, we find that 70% of the Arabs, both in 2015 and in 2016, in the 2 consecutive polls, chose to include Israeli in their self-perceived identity in different combinations. The most common definition is Arab Israeli, 26.5%. Second in rank, 15.5% define themselves as Arab, Palestinian, Israelis. So it's very interesting that a very small number of people, that is about 30%, do not include the term Israeli in their characterization or definition of their own identity in different ways. Like 2.5% say that they are just Palestinians, 10% say that they're Arab, Palestinian, etc., etc. But if you add all the attributes to the term Israeli, as I said before, it's 70, and it's steady in the last 2 years. I think this is a very interesting issue. We think in our work that this question of identity is a very, very important and indicative one with regard to the perception and attitude of Arabs to their Jewish counterparts and to the State of Israel. And I think that this is a very interesting finding that I just wanted to share with you. Okay, another set of questions was also presented in the same INSS poll. Again, I'm talking about the two polls of 15 and 16. I'm talking about the end of 16, which is just recently, about a month ago, when the Arab people were asked to rank their own order of priorities. Generally speaking, we gave them several options, and the interesting thing is the 62, almost two-thirds of the Arabs in Israel voted for the issue of equal rights to the Arabs in Israel. This is, by the way, somewhat lower to the 70% that we found to take this priority as number one back in 2015. On the other side, 38% of the people questions were of support to the solution of the Palestinian issues in the occupied territories as their first ranking agenda, which means, to our understanding, is that now and again Arabs in Israel give clearly their first priority to their own own local issues. Still, about a third, a little bit more than a third, think that the number one issue, as far as they're concerned, should be given to the overall Palestinian issue, specifically in the occupied territories. So this, I think, also gives a very clear indication as to the message that I tried to share with you in the beginning of my talk. Okay, another question that was asked in this specific INSS poll, again in the two last years, the question was for them to characterize their connection as individuals with Jews in Israel. 38%, said that they have good relations with Jews. 34% said that they have good or reasonable connections within the framework of work and study. So they were specific to focus their relations with the Jews on the environment of their professional environment, let's put it this way. 26% said that there is no connection between themselves and their fellow Jews, and barely 1.5%, which is a very small number, said that they are not interested in having any connection with the Jews in Israel. So again, I think that if you look at the numbers, 38 good relations and 34% said that they have reasonable connections with the Jews in the framework of the work, is quite, I think, a promising suggestion as far as the Arabs are concerned when asked about those questions. And the last one, last interesting remark which I want to share with you is the a finding that was submitted again recently in the Israel Institute for Democracy in Jerusalem. They had a very interesting index that they publish each year, and they just came up last month with a last one for 2016. They said on the same issue that we are talking about presently that 72% of the Arabs in Israel support the entry of Arab parties to the coalition. Now, of course, this is nothing to be expected to happen presently, not with the present coalition. But if you're talking about attitudes or perceptions, I think it's a very interesting position that almost 3/4 of the Arabs in Israel think that it is possible for the Arabs to enter and to participate actively with the Israeli politics in general. So to conclude, I think that the data supports my main message that I think is quite promising, and it's quite consistent. It has been this case for some time now, and I think that we have a lot of work to still do in order to keep this trend going on for the future. And the last remark that I would say is that this is not an easy road. There are quite strong contenders or groups within Israel politics and the public at large that resent this kind of an integration kind of policy on the part of the government, on the part of the Jewish majority. So if we see that within this overall quite hostile atmosphere, if the Arabs indeed come up with what I suggested for you that they come up with, I think it's an interesting and quite optimistic kind of a picture. So thank you very much.
Meir, in your insight, you mentioned two parallel trends that are happening within the Arab community. One of the integration versus segregation, and their correspondence with the trend happening in Israeli society, as you use the term as like a mirror picture of each other. Can you elaborate a little bit around that?
Well, I'm not sure it's thank you. Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think it's not really I don't know. A mirror is supposed to reflect what is presented in front of the mirror, right? But I think that here you have a very interesting conflicting image. That on one hand, the Arabs, I think generally speaking, particularly I'm talking about the Arab people at large, and I'm talking about the population, and some of their politicians to a lesser degree are actually representing a position of moderation and integration. I think that the picture within the Jewish communities is not very encouraging. And the interesting thing is that you see a sort of a disparity between the attitudes of the two sides. So if you ask me, let me share with you some other numbers that we have gathered from our survey, the INSS survey, the recent one of conducted in November and December of 2016. And the question was, how do you, as a Jew, this was a question that the Jews were asked, how do you see or perceive the Israeli Arab citizens? So the 41% of the interviewees said that we have this saying in Israel, respect him but be suspicious. I don't know exactly how to translate it, but I think that you know what I mean. So in other words, like check and verify, if you know what I mean. So, respect and suspect, 41%, which means that behave nicely, but still remember that he is on the other side. 24% of the Jews asked, which is almost 1/4, a quarter of the overall population represented in this poll said that they perceive the Arabs as potentially the enemy. Okay, very strong word. 30% perceive the Arabs as citizens of equal footing, and 4%, by the way, only 4% said that their vision is to bring in the long run to the expulsion of the Arabs from the State of Israel. So you can look at it from different points of view, but I think that it is not a very good, not very positive kind of a picture. I wish it were different. It's not too bad, but it's quite disconcerting, and it would have given a good reason for the Arabs to be much more skeptical, or much more, being, further away from the perception of integration. But this does not really go hand in hand with what we see in our data.
You make the distinction in your writing between the economic level, where you see a big desire from all your findings among Arab society to integrate, and it's a very different attitude than anything that touches more on the ethnic connection, on the anything to do with identifying with symbols. There you actually see a withdrawn, and as I think you even used the word, there is more turn inwards into the community and more segregation. Can you elaborate about these two opposite
yes. Okay. Let me start with this last part of your question concerning the issue of self-segregation or closing in. We have some indications, we've seen some indications to suggest that, again, in some sectors, perhaps not generally speaking, there is this line of thought that perhaps, for the Arabs themselves, by the Arabs, that, and it corresponds to what I said beforehand, that our need or desire and willingness to integrate does not really receive the support, if not the enthusiasm of the Jewish public at large. And I think that many of them, if asked, would say that indeed the government is at least declaring, and perhaps in a way also trying to do some things in order to promote the economic prosperity of the Arab population. But, and here comes a very big but, number one, it's at best taking a long time, too long, and if they would be a little bit more cynical, they would say that the government is not doing its share in actually pursuing its own decisions. And I'm really referring to the decision taken last December, not the December 16, but December 15, a little bit more than a year and a week ago, to really grant the Arab population with huge subsidies on different issues, from housing to education, transportation, etc., etc. And so far, there has been some progress in that, but the progress has been very, very slow, very, very slow. So there are some Arabs who say, you see, this is what happens, nice declarations, positive kind of policy in terms of announcements, etc., but when it comes to reality, to implementation, very slow, very little, very late. Others, though, would say, and we hear those statements again and again from Arab politicians, mostly on the local level, who say that this is partly our own problem. This is our own situation that hinders the application or the implementation of the government policy. And if we were more ready and more capable to take responsibility, again, mostly in the local authority level, the villages, the towns, etc., etc., we will be, if we are more professional and we have the right people to do the job, etc., etc., we would be able to advance much more rapidly, and we will not be so dependent on the government, which is the case presently. So I think that to a large extent what happens now with this 5-year program to enhance the economy of the Arab population in Israel is definitely something that has to be measured against its progress, and people are looking at the what's happening in terms of achievements. They try to measure it, and I must admit that even though there is a forward movement, it's not fast enough, it's not apparent enough, and it does give rise to skepticism on part of many of the Arabs.
In your writing, you mentioned you yourself. Your opinion is that the self-segregation process is dangerous. Can you talk a little bit about this, and also express your opinion on whether considering the trends towards Arab society that are happening within the Jewish majority, what is there a more effective course of action that you see, that you would suggest, or that you're
well, first of all, thank you for quoting what we are doing, and indeed we are quite concerned about this inward segregation, or thoughts about looking inward. Because but it's not a clear-cut kind of a situation, because on one hand I think that it's very important that the Arabs realize, or Arabs in general, and again mostly mayors and heads of Arab communities, emphasize the need for themselves to take responsibility and do more of the job. I mean, I think this is a very positive kind of a position, and I think that we should encourage it. I'm not sure we know exactly how to do it, but it's a good one. It's a constructive kind of a notion or a suggestion. On the other hand, I think that if they go further than that, I think that this would mean or represent for us that they do not think that their hopes, or that the hopes that they have granted the strategy of integration helps them a lot. And if they are disappointed, I think that this would not be a very positive element, because, again, I mean, my assumption is that the policy of integration, or the attitude of integration, is a very positive one, which means that it puts the responsibility not only on the Arab side, but also on the Israeli side. And here again, I think that it's very important to understand that the government, in this respect, has a major role in enhancing what it started to do. In two ways. Number one is to implement as fast as possible and as wide as possible the programs that have been approved. This is one thing which is very important. But the other side of the coin is the way they express themselves. And here, unfortunately, we see again and again that in different instances there is sort of an instinct on the part of some of our politicians, even the very senior ones, that whenever they are in any kind of a political stress, they come up with these sayings about again anti-Arab pronouncements, which is not only not responsible as far as I'm concerned, but takes the you know, character of instigation. And there are enough people in Israel who gladly adopt this kind of this line, and again, of course, take it further on. So I think that here the government ministers, and of course the prime minister, first and foremost, have a very, very significant kind of a responsibility, both to make sure that their own decision as of December 15 will be carried out to its fullest extent, and at the same time work very vigorously to promote the collaboration and integration on the public level with regard to the Israeli situation of relations between the majority and the minority.
Thank you. I have if anyone wants to submit a question over the phone, operator, can you remind people how to do that?
Yes, if you have any questions, please press #1 on your phone. Again, that's #1 if you have any questions.
Thank you. And in the meanwhile, I'll continue to ask questions that I receive over email. A question about the numbers that you present from the poll. Were those numbers, or the Jewish numbers, broken down demographically at any point?
The question is, the answer to that is
the
positive.
numbers. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. The last numbers that I gave about the respect and suspect and potential enemies, etc., etc. We are working on that presently, and we'll be glad to share it with you through Michal, perhaps later on when we have all the details. But the answer is definitely yes, and we have seen, as of now, I can say that the more extreme groups within the Jewish communities that are mostly anti-Arabs, let's say, are young ones more than the older ones, especially among the age of 18 and 27. And then the next one is what we call national religions, which is, mostly people associated with the Naftali Bennett's political party on one hand and the settlers on the other. So those two groups stand up as the more, how should I say it, hostile groups within the population. But if you want to have some more numbers or more specific numbers on that, we can provide it to you via Michal later on when we are done with the.
Absolutely, we do get a lot of requests for once you finish processing all the data. We'd love to share.
Sure.
I will definitely share it with everyone.
Sure.
Another question. Is the relative radicalization of politicians vis-a-vis their public in Arab sector, is that unusual relative to other political systems? When the leadership is divided, can the extremism be explained by an attempt to establish credibility within the public, even if the public appears more moderate?
Well, again, a very interesting question, and let me just elaborate a little bit on that. We have seen, repeatedly in numerous cases in the past, that there were two groups within the Arab sector that were more radical in nature than the others. One was the nationalist group, represented presently by Balad, by this party that I mentioned beforehand. But there was another very significant group which I didn't mention so far, and those are the more fundamental Arabs associated mostly with the northern branch of the Islamic movement. Now, first of all, I want to say that it was very interesting. I am sure that you remember that about a year ago, the government has outlawed the northern faction of the Islamic movement in Israel, And very interestingly, the reaction within the Arab population, even though not very positive, of course, about that, the reactions were quite minor, I would say. And this is very interesting. And we're still looking at the leaders that were associated one way or another with the Islamic movement, and we see that they are still quite inactive. We thought that they would be more active in their attempts to renew their operations, if not politically, then socially, etc., etc. But I think that interestingly enough, they understand that their position has to be reconsidered. And I'm not saying that they are not present; they are very present, mostly socially, but much less in presence, and necessarily much less in political or in action than they were before. So there are those groups. I think that it would be safe to say that some of the leaders are taking specifically the more extreme stands on the different nationalistic issues. I think that they believe probably that it helps them to be more conspicuous, to be more known, to be more on the news, etc., etc. But I wouldn't take it too far. I think that there is always the ideological background, the ideological basis, and I would not suggest to ourselves to think that they just do it, or they just speak the way they do and do whatever they do just because they want to be conspicuous and to be supported by the people. I think that they basically, most of them, I would suggest, believe that this is the right way. So if you watch, for example, Basel Ghattas, this person that we were talking about beforehand, with the cell phone smuggling, etc., I think that if you watch what he's saying, and you're looking at his history, his record of many, many years, I think he has always been a very active, always controversial, not only within the Jewish public, but also in the Arab public itself. But he has been very consistent in those things. So I think that I give him the credit that he thinks so, he believes so, and that's basically what he's doing. If he thinks that it would work for him also in terms of being more famous, etc., perhaps.
I'm reminding everyone that if anyone wants to submit a question, it's #1 on your phone. And another question that I just received over email to you, Meir, is if assuming that the trend of that excludes Arab society from the political, cultural, social spheres in Israel continue, as opposed to the economic sphere, and assuming that the self-segregation trend that is happening within the Arab society will continue as well, is there any chance then for an economic integration even, or will that inevitably fail as well?
Well, let me put it this way. I think that economic integration is very important. It's very important for the Arabs. It's important for the country at large, because we have to remember we're talking about 20% of the population, together with the Haredim, that it's more than 1/3 of the population. Their share of contribution to the overall wealth of the country is very limited, and it's very important for Israel and for themselves, for the Arabs themselves, and as it is for the Haredim, to be more participant or more participatory in the economic realm. So this is a very important thing. But at the same time, I think that we tend to believe, or I tend to believe, and I think that data strengthens this notion that when you are more prosperous, when you are better off economically, and you see that integration pays off for you, then you would tend to be more appreciative of stability, of more integration, of having better relations with the Jews, etc., etc. On both sides, by the way. So I think that this is a very, very important policy, a very positive policy on the part of the government, if indeed implemented as it should. And I think that this is a win-win situation. And that's why I am so supportive of this policy, and I'm trying to do whatever I can in terms of our limited capacities to impress upon people, both Arabs and Jews, and specifically the government agencies, that this is not only possible but very significant. I think that it's right to say that there are very important factors within the Israeli government who share this kind of a policy, not only share but actually initiate and promote those things. And it's very important to understand and to acknowledge that they do this very, very important job in an excellent manner. Problem is that it's rough. We have a very, very unfortunate kind of a bureaucracy. There are all kinds of hindrances and obstacles to implement it. So that's why we see that it's too slow. Definitely too slow.
But do you think there is a chance for the, as you say, that for the economic piece to be successful when the other pieces of the inclusion on the more cultural, political, etc. levels is only going the opposite way?
Well, I am optimistic in this respect, and I'm hopeful that the more we integrate economically and more prosperous we enable the Arabs to be, I think that it will have a positive impact. Of course, it's a big question, but what can you do? I mean, of course, the other thing is for the government to be more responsible and to be more proactive about this less tangible elements of collaboration and mutual relations. But this is something that we can do that much about. I mean, let's see, for example, our President Ruby Rivlin is very, very active on those issues. He's very, very supportive. He is working very, very hard to enhance this element of stability and integration and collaboration, etc., etc. It's tough. It's really tough, and unfortunately, there is quite a strong group of politicians and some others that are not very conducive to the ideas that I'm trying to promote. Or rather, let's give the credit to the president.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions on the phone?
Michal, there are no questions.
Okay, so I think we have time for another written question over email. Do you think that this the recent episodes of Basel Ghattas and the story which of the Arab leadership not attending the funeral of President Peres and Joint List leadership responses indicate a trend away from pragmatism within the party as well, or are these more individual events?
Yeah, I didn't refer to this very sad episode when the Joint List decided not to attend the funeral. I think it was a big mistake. I think this move was rejected overwhelmingly by the Arab population. It's just yet another indication to the existence of this gap I was talking about between the overall atmosphere or attitude of moderation and pragmatism of the people at large, and sometimes I'd say the mistakes that the politicians, including the Joint List, their mistakes, the mistakes that they're doing in terms of being responsive to not only to civil manners and things that are expected in the name of moderation and pragmatism. So this was definitely a mistake. it is perceived to be a mistake by many of the Arabs. I mean, polls showed overwhelming disrespect and a contrarian position of the Arab public. And when you could hear Ayman Odeh himself, who was part of this decision, how he responded to those allegations, you could see that he was extremely uncomfortable about this. So, but he did it anyhow. So that was the case, and which again means, number one, that leaders, including Arab leaders, do make mistakes, and that Ayman Odeh, who is mostly, I still think, I give him the credit of being a pragmatist and a very constructive kind of a politician, he makes mistakes, and this was quite an unfortunate and not a necessary kind of a mistake on his part, but he did it, and I think it has an effect on his overall standing as far as his own constituency is concerned. And this, I tried to speak about that earlier, that this by itself is not a very good sign. I would be much happier to see a tighter connection between, or closer connection between the pragmatism of the population at large and also the political leadership. And it seems that this is not exactly the case as of now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Meir, for this thorough presentation. I think we'll all love to have the data you presented once you have it processed and analyzed and in English. So please do share it, and we will share it with everyone who attended the call. And thank you again. This call was recorded, so if anyone wants to share it with other people, the link will appear on our website. And we'll look forward to continue the conversation on this topic on trends within Arab community in the series of calls in the upcoming months. Thank you, Meir, very much.
Thank you very much, Michal. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Thank you very much. The call has ended. We are dropping everyone now. Have a great day.